Let's go back to talking about the events from 1915, 1922. Give me some sense of the scope. What kind of population figures are we talking? What kind of numbers are we talking?
Yeah, we don't have census figures for that period. So everything we work with are estimates. But most likely, there were over 2 million Armenians in the area of the Ottoman Empire. And again, the estimates vary tremendously about how many Armenians actually died in the genocide, but probably up to 1.5 million Armenians died from direct killings, from the immense suffering that they endured as they went on these long marches through the desert from historic Armenia to what today is Syria and Iraq. So we're talking about a huge proportion of the Armenian population, perhaps as much as 2/3 of the population, that was killed in the genocide. And the survivors then are scattered all around the world. And you can find Armenian communities, from Australia to California to Minnesota to France, everywhere.
And has the culture survived in any sense among those communities? Is there still a strong enough community that the language survives?
The language survives with difficulty. The community survives. And I think it's a testament both to Armenians and I think to the general human determination to survive these kinds of immense tragedies. But Armenians have been particularly careful about preserving their culture, preserving their religion, preserving their cuisine, and more recently also preserving the stories of the genocide. The genocide was very widely known when it occurred. It was known in the United States. It was known in Europe, even though this was in the middle of World War I. We know it from consular reports, from diplomatic reports. We know it from missionary reports. And there were headlines in 1915 and 1916 in the New York Times and the London Times, all over the Western world and beyond. So this was very, very widely known. By the mid-1920s, though, a kind of silence had descended upon the genocide, partly for political reasons, because the Western powers had determined that in 1923 that Turkey could be a bulwark against communist Russia, the Soviet Union, and then began a long, decades and decades long history of political maneuverings, political alliances, because Turkey, Republican Turkey, then was seen as a valuable ally. That continues to this day. So partly for political reasons, the silence descended, but I think also Armenians in the decades afterward kept silent themselves. For the most part, there was a sense of shame about what had happened to them. That is not at all untypical or unusual. Although the Holocaust is very much in our public consciousness today, in the late 40s, 1950s, and 1960s, very, very few people, very, very few survivors talked about their experiences. Even in Israel, people did not talk in the 1950s about the experience of the Holocaust. So that silence is unusual. But it's taken new generations of Armenians, it's taken some courageous Turkish scholars like Tana Akçam to start to break the silence. And I think for the last, 25 years, we're learning more and more about the Armenian genocide. We're hearing more and more about the genocide. We hear it in scholarly forums, and we hear it in public and political forums as well.
The Holocaust has many interesting parallels, many interesting differences. There's a sense among all Jewish peoples that it's their responsibility to carry forward the memory of what happened in the 1940s in Germany. Why didn't that happen among all Christian peoples uniting with the Armenians? If there really was this clear distinction that the Armenians were, in fact, from the first Christian state, why wasn't the Christian world hearing about this in 1915 in the newspapers, etc., responding with an outcry?
Well, in that period, in the years of the genocide itself and immediately thereafter, many peoples in the Western world, including Christians, of course, sought to aid Armenians, protect Armenians. But the Armenian cause really got lost to political developments, to power political developments in the wake of World War I, in the wake of oil discoveries in what is today Iraq, in the wake, again, of the strong desires of the Western powers, including the United States, to contain Soviet communism. And for that reason, Turkey was, became a crucial ally for the Western powers. But I also think that the issue of the Armenian genocide is, shall we say, too important an issue to be left to Armenians and Turks, just as the issue of the Holocaust is too important an issue to be left to Jews and Germans. In other words, these are human rights issues that go substantially beyond the particular communities involved. These are issues that have to concern all of us. There was no term genocide in 1915. That term was not invented until the 1940s, and then entered into international law in 1948 with the United Nations Genocide Convention. But there is almost complete scholarly consensus that what happened to Armenians was most certainly a genocide that fits the definition of the term that came later. And that has to be recognized as a violation of international standards of human rights, of how any population should be treated, how minority populations should be treated. So it's an international human rights issue. It's not solely an issue of the two communities that were involved.